Hello everyone, and welcome to the Cambridge Service Alliance webinar. Today's topic is going to be the 7 critical success factors in the shift to services. Veronica Martinez will be presenting. Her co-authors are Andy Neely and Florian Ermertzer from the Cambridge Service Alliance, as well Neil Allison, Monica Lund from Pearson North America, Dav Pissar from IBM, Thomas Buckler from Caterpillar, Stuart Lester Evans, Graham Paddington from BA Systems, and Daniel Smith from Zoetis.
Thank you. As Florian mentioned, today I am presenting the critical success factors in the shift to services, and how I am going to start presenting this is factor by factor, and I will bring everything wrapping up towards the end of this webinar, and then I will allow you for a couple of questions if necessary. The critical success factor number 1, assessing the market and internal readiness of the organization. This is, based on the research that we carried on, this is probably one of the most important factors, but it is often very much overlooked by organizations. Selling products is different from selling services, and we need to understand that selling services required a shift of accountabilities across the ecosystem. So the more complex that the service is, the more chances for these accountabilities to change across the ecosystem are. Therefore, we need to assess if all the parties involved in this shift to services are mentally and emotionally prepared and ready to accept this challenge and these changes in accountability. There are four different actions that drive success in these critical success factors. My colleagues and my co-authors, and here I have one, which is in the line with us, Daniel Smith, and he can add more clarity if it's needed. And we identified that four different actions drive success in this critical success factor. The first one is to clearly define the service value proposition and confirm that it is an appealing value proposition for all the parties involved, not only for the company who wants to provide it. In doing that, we identified that a good action here that we recommend is to run an early prototype or a pilot. First of all, to evaluate the appealing of the value proposition and the effectiveness of the business case that you have, depending on the appealing or the attractiveness of your value proposition. And this will help you to confirm whether or not these services will create more value for your customers before moving on and start putting things in place to deliver services. Let's move to critical success factor 2. Critical success factor 2 is creating the strategic and cultural change. And here is so interesting because while most of organizations we have been trained and we have been very much executing the budgeting of resources when there is a change in the organization, we don't have this train and this kind of habit when we are doing it for services. However, when we talk about services, we talk about services around working with people. And therefore, we have to budget not just time, but also resources for allowing people to go through this cultural change and this mindset to allow the new culture of services to penetrate the organization. Therefore, it is important that in this cultural change, we need to recognize that the customer, and this is something that has to permeate the whole organization and the ecosystems where we are operating, to recognize that the customer values lies in the solution offered rather than in the traditional product. And this is sometimes difficult when the organization has produced products and has been very much proud of the production of the products rather than the service. But all of this is about creating this strategic context and delivering a compelling story that persuades people inside and outside of the organization of the value of the service. The actions that drive success in this critical success factor 2 is to have, as I mentioned, have this clear and compelling service vision and try to penetrate this service culture across the organization. And how this can be done, we identify through the research is that it's important to ensure that the staff and the ecosystem partners engaged in this service delivery are engaged and adopting an end customer focus. So, and ensure also that your customers are mentally prepared to consume your services. Critical success factor number 3, and this is about building the structures and governance for service. And here is so important because creating services, you have to make room for the new business idea in your organization. Creating the right governance and structures for service is crucial, both as a sign of organizational commitment as well as to deliver, to focus the effort and show that the organization really cares for producing that value and strategically following up. So establishing appropriate set of incentives and metrics, ensuring that the product service units are mutually supportive rather than competitive builds the important success of this critical success factor. And there are four actions as well in these success factors that we identify as the most prominent one. And I would like to start with showing this or saying this: power without authority is a recipe for disaster. And the other way around, authority without power is a recipe for disaster. Therefore, it is important that we create the right governance and structures with the right leaders to deal and to live this service culture across the whole organization. Establish and agree the strategic objectives and align the incentives and metrics across the business units. And finally, it's important here what we identify that it's important to recognize that every organization, when they are delivering services, they deliver different type of services. And we need to recognize that we need, therefore, different type of contracting and governance aligned to those type of services. This is something that we identify that many of the organizations that we interview and the organizations that participate in our workshops, they have this rather problem. It's a problematic type of idea, because most of organizations, when they think about the shift to services, they think in only one shift, only one type of a structure, only one type of contracting. And in the way, when you discover and you do more research and they confront more problems, they identify that they need a different kind of contracting and governance structure for each one of the service types that they have at home. Let's move to critical success factor number 4. And this is about dedicate the resources for innovation and delivery. Services, as we mentioned, is resource intensive, and here we involve people, but we also involve technology, information, and every single item of this will require investment. Therefore, we need to ensure that we have the necessary resources both to establishing and sustaining services for the future. And it's important here that not only identify what we need, but also identify what are our key gaps, because this will help us to establish a stronger relationship and properly build the ecosystem around us. Therefore, what we identify here, the 4 actions that drive success in critical success factor number 4 are: map. First of all, we identify that a very good action and good practice that we identify through this research is to map and identify the resources and capabilities required to deliver a particular service. If you have different type of services that the complexity changes between one another, you will need to identify and map the different resources for each type of service that you are delivering. And as I mentioned before, the capability gap is important to identify and map it into the previous map that you have developed. An important aspect of this, and here I think that Daniel will agree with me, we identify that create a short and long-term budgets to support the shift to services is important, because in that way we can be balancing the investment required for today, and not only for today, but also for tomorrow. Let's move to critical success factor number 5. And here is about this critical success factor is to proactively manage and engage the engagement and trust with your people and your organization. And here, services, as we mentioned, is about relationship and experience. Customers evaluate, and this is something that we identify from all research, that the customers evaluate services not only in terms of the functional and performance of your service, but also in the emotional impact that this creates in the organization. So therefore, a continued engagement of customers at different levels across the organization is important. And why a typical pitfall that most of organizations do is that the salesman will go and make the first point of contact. And therefore, the first relationship that the company has stays with the salesman. Then later on, someone, a technical person, would like to take over this relationship, but we identify that usually there is a gap between the salesman and the technical person to deliver the continuous service. And here is where the problem starts, because we have to penetrate the level of engagement at different levels and also engage mutually different type of people from organization. Therefore, the transition from one to another in a life cycle, it is smoother and faster. One important thing that I would like to highlight in this critical success factor is that in the world of services, you walk the service journey with your customer. And here is very important because most of organizations start, or many of the organizations that we study in this research, they are very much technical organizations, industrial organizations. And therefore, the awareness of the importance of walking the journey with your customer, identifying that it is more important for your customer not only the delivery and the performance of the functional physical product that you can develop is more important, but no, the emotional impact that you create, the emotional recovery when the customer goes into problem is more important than just being efficient or functional in the performance that your service can produce. The actions that drive success in this critical success factor number 5 are 4. First of all, we identify that the first action that drives success here is design the customer engagement plan. Identify, and as I mentioned previously, we need to recognize what is the customer journey and walking with him. Once that you identify the customer journey and you map it, you can plan the engagements for a specific type of services with clear objectives, clear targets, and clear measures. If you don't have that plan, it's very difficult to continue engaging with the customer in a more proactive way. At the same time that you engage and you create this engagement plan, it's important to develop the channels. Plan the channels, how you are going to open these channels, share and harmonize the information to relevant people inside your organization and across your ecosystem to better serve the service for your customer. And track the actions. This is an important thing that when we interview customers, this was one of the important things that one of the people, for example, I can give you an example of this. One of my interviewees, and it was a customer, he said, well, the company, therefore I am referring as the provider, come and get feedback from us. But he never come back and say what they have done to improve it or to make us happier. So I think that this is an important thing that we have to learn. We are talking about proactively manage and engage with trust with the customers. And if we don't go back to the customers and say, well, we fail in this, but this is what is the action plan for recovery. If you don't have this conversation with the customer will feel that is left alone and lonely. And therefore it is more vulnerable to go and look for another type of services outside of your parameters and your ecosystem. Therefore, here it is very important that the more continuous engagement that you have with the customer, then the more opportunities that you have to continually gauge the opportunity between the customer need and the demands. And this is what, at the end of the day, what we call is sustaining the shift to services. Let's move to critical success factor number 6. And here we talk about the develop and embed service processes. There are 5 key service processes that underpin the ability to develop and deploy services. And if I have to say, this is one of the most critical factors. Why? Because then it will identify that you will have to identify processes and align metrics in order from the delivery and creation of your service until the innovation upgrade of the same services within the customer's premises. And let me talk, we mentioned that there are 5 key processes. The first one is designing and developing the service operating model. How do you design and create and make sure that this is a good idea, that the customers, again, coming back to critical success factor number 1, that is an idea that is appealing and you have a nice story to sell the value proposition to the customer as well as to your ecosystem partners. Number 2 is managing the service portfolio. Interestingly enough, if we talk about business-like, this is something quite obvious. But when we talk about services in industrial settings, like the study that we did, this is kind of a new thing, interestingly enough. But our research shows that managing the service portfolio, not many organizations have it in place. There has been working in a very much organic way. And I think I can say from all the research all interviews that we have been carrying out through this research, 95% of the people who respond from the interviews, they have been mentioning that they haven't had a proper managing of the service portfolio and that they usually follow an organic kind of growth. And it's interesting because this comes hand in hand with the third element, which is piloting, simulating, and testing the service offering. If you don't have proper rules to define and manage your service portfolio, therefore, it is very difficult for you as an organization to identify which are the pilots or the simulations or the testing that you want to scale up and which are the ones that you have to kill. Some organizations in the past, we have identified that they just run with the pilots for more than 3 years. And it is important. The 3 years is not a problem. You have to identify the life cycle that works for you. The important part is that you have proper rules and processes that dictate when you have to evaluate and when you have to pass or kill a service pilot. Number 4 is about scaling and commercializing services. And here is the continuation of point number 3. Once that your pilot is strong enough and has proved to be commercially viable, and you have a good business case, a good business value proposition, then you will be ready to scaling up and commercialize it in a wider areas. Here is important in scaling and commercializing to have certain roles and especially metrics. We identify through the research, my colleagues and my co-authors such as Daniel Smith, who is part of this webinar, we identify that it's important to identify those metrics at the strategic as well as the financial level. You cannot take decisions just in the financial aspect. Why? Because the financial aspect just gives you short insight into what happened into the future. The strategic one might give you, if you do it properly, a longer term visibility of the future of that particular service. But it is important to have this set of metrics, commercial, as I mentioned, strategic and financial, very early on established before you start scaling and commercializing the services. And finally, as any other life cycle, the point number 5 is around once that your product has been your service has been in the market for quite a while. Sometimes your customer or sometimes your market or your internal network will push you to make an upgrade. And this is what we call transitioning your service from generation 1 to generation 2. And here it is important to identify the right process when and how you are going to deliver that transition and who is going to be involved. And obviously, when we talk about transition from service generation 1 to generation 2, you have to prove very much that you have this particular kind of new value proposition for the customer, improve or enhance, that really makes a difference for your customer to continue working with you. But here, what are the actions that drive success? And here, as I mentioned, this is one of the most critical factors in terms that it is long and is the whole life cycle of the process of services. And there are 4 actions that we try to summarize it. And here is what's very difficult for us who help and who were the co-authors of this report, because we have to distill these ones into 4 or into something that is manageable for you to remember and to operate. But I can summarize it. Rule number 1 or action number 1 to drive success in this critical success factor is design and develop a service operating model. A service operating model that it is right for your organization, right for your customer, and that you can continuously, it is an alive business service operating model, something that you come back and you improve. Then, number 2, establish the roles for service portfolios. And this is what I mean, rules, financial and non-financial rules. When and how you are going to terminate a prototype. And here it is important when you mention service portfolios is to talk about the accountabilities and where the budget is going to come from. And this is part of managing your service portfolio. And this is part of this are underpinned 5 different tensions. And for example, the most critical one is how a service pilot is going to be funding, self-funded, customer funding, or there is going to be a special pot of funding for developing the service. And these are the things that you have to identify. But no, you cannot take decisions until you are aware of what are these rules that you wanted to create to run your service in-house. And this leads me to number 3. Action number 3 is to define the criteria to gauge success. Once that you are running a prototype and piloting at different stages, you have to create a good measures of success. Why? Because the early that you identify that a pilot is not working and is not going to work in future, the more savings that you can do. And more proactively, you can use that particular set of money to launch another one. And finally, number 4, action number 4 of this critical success factor is to establish processes for scaling, commercializing, and upgrading. And this is very much down to what is and how is your ecosystem and your customer. Finally, critical success factor number 7, and this is the final one, is continually innovate, optimize, and communicate the good service practices. And this is interesting because we have very good practices. So if you study management tools, there are some management tools that establish this level of feedback, of optimization, or innovation through the feedback of good services practice. However, all the organizations that I interview, no one of these organizations had a proper feedback communication that stores and also bring these learnings for new people or rephrase new teams when they are launching new services. Therefore, it is important not just to get it, it's not just to get it, but also to have a mechanism and these lessons to be put it in a proper kind of a platform to share across the organization. And sometimes organizations decide, the organizations that we identify, such as Mantrox, that they also share the best practices with key members of the ecosystem. What are the actions that drive success? So you can read this and very much underpin the collection of good service practices and disseminating those. But it's not just disseminating them, but also create formal repositories for people that once that you have created that they can come and refresh those. as I mentioned, I talk about the 7 critical success factors, and this slide bring all the 7 critical success factors together. The first 2 are one after another. It is very much important, first of all, to assess the market readiness before you start making investments or making changes in your context. The block that you see, or the square that you see in blue here, these are the day-to-day operational. This means that these 4 elements, structure, governance, resources, engagement, and trust, and service processes, are the 4 different critical success factors that they have to run in parallel, and they have to continuously communicating. And finally, the communication of best practices that bring everything together and refresh. We have been trying, we know that this is perhaps far too much information for you when we talk about 7 critical success factors and the actions that drive success into each one of the critical success factors. So we have been, and here these are from IBM, we have had many conversations in how we can create a reliable tool, something that could help managers. And we have created this roadmap tool of the 7 critical success factors for people like you, that you are so busy that you need to know what are the critical success factors and what specifically you can do. And this is a sort of roadmap that helps you to put a little bit of making a checklist, but as well as identifying your plans if something is not positioning accordingly. If you want to know more about this report and read more about this research, you can get this report for free, and you can by following the link beside the Cambridge Service Alliance. If you want to know more and be trained about the shift to services, we have a program coming on the 16th and 17th of March for people who are interested. If you have any questions, I am open to questions. Thank you.